Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd, fa'auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Sadaqallahul azim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Looking at now ayah number 81 of Surah Baqarah, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بلى من كسب سيئاته وأحاطت به خطيئته فأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون صدق الله العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this ayah, indeed, whoever earns evil and his sin has encompassed him, those are the companions of the fire, they will abide therein eternally. So this ayah follows in the narration about the Bani Israel and how they brought up this issue that even if they were caught out doing something wrong and they had to admit to it, and if they did get caught and punished for it, then that punishment, albeit in Jahannam il Hellfire, would be for a short time, and that short time maybe a few days, and then they would come out. So there are many issues concerning this idea of few days, even the very idea of time itself, because a day, what they would say in the sight of Allah Ta'ala, is equivalent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, to 1,000 years. So it could easily be that they were thinking days in terms of our 24-hour cycle days. So a few of those days. But even if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to take them up on his own reckoning of time, 1,000 years, that would be 2,000 to 3,000 years. And having said that, if it was to be taken up on their own accounts even, of a 24-hour period, and 2 or 3 of those, well, as I discussed and touched upon previously, fire, even in the earthly fire sense, is of the ultimate pain and is unbearable even to burn a small part of the body. So this is something that was just completely out of order in any sense, common sense, intelligence, that they should have this idea that it'll be only a few days and we'll come out and that we will be able to bear it. It is unbearable, even one moment of the smallest measure. So the Bani Israel denied the prophethood of Isa alayhi salam, and they denied the prophethood of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, both in their own times. Therefore, their claim to Iman is negated, and thereby their claim and hopes of being released from hell are dissolved. So this is now, in this ayah, a conclusion to their statements and their assumptions in the previous ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to them, because of their basis being that, well, we are believers, so if we do get caught out and we go to hell, it will be for a few days. Well, not only do they have to consider this few days being a few thousand years, or even a few days being unbearable, but now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah is completely confounding them by saying that by denial of Isa alayhi salam's prophethood, by denial of the prophet of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Iman is negated. And once the Iman is negated, it's over. So therefore, any chance of being dissolved and resolved from hell, to be able to come out of that, to have the idea that, you know, there's any hope, whether it's a few days earthly cycle, 24 hours cycle days, or whether it is even a few thousand years, because even with that, there is that hope that will eventually come out. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them that hope is dissolved. What little case or hope they had is no more. It's over. Your Iman is gone. If you have denied the prophethood of Isa alayhi salam or Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even according to the Bani Israel belief, the belief of Musa alayhi salam, just as we have in Islam, we have the kalima, which is in 2 parts. La ilaha illallah. This affirms the belief in Allah, but it doesn't stop there. Muhammad Rasulullah then affirms belief in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not just as the Prophet sent by Allah, but whatever he gives to you to do or to forbid you from, then you do what he tells you to do and you forbid yourself from what he forbids you from. And if that second part is negated, the iman is broken. So the same applies to the principle of iman in the Bani Israel. The kalima would be La ilaha illallah, Musa Rasulullah. So to deny the prophethood of Musa, who then predicted that Isa would come, who predicted that Rasul would come in the Torah, then is to deny the second part of their iman. So they have lost their case. So this ayah concludes their case, and there is no hope, no salvation when a member of the Bani Israel enters the hellfire for negation of the prophethood of either Isa or Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is over. They are now entering the Jahannam as kuffar, not as Bani Israel anymore. So now let's look at how this ayah applies to us today. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بلى من كسب سيئاته وأحاطت به خطيئته فأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون صدق الله العظيم. Indeed, whoever earns evil and his sin has encompassed him, those are the companions of the fire, they will abide therein eternally. So, we've looked at how this applies to the Bani Israel, the context of this ayah. Now, when we look at it for ourselves, it takes on a very serious form for us, with a very serious warning for us. From that previous ayah that we did, we understood that even a moment in the fire of this world is unbearable. So what of the fire of hell? This was in our last lesson. We made a comparison of the fire of dunya and the fire of Jahannam being so much more hotter, 70 times hotter. And the Sahaba, when they heard this, were amazed, and they said that just the fire of this world, its intensity, it's sufficient. There's no more need to be double, let alone 70 times. So this is how they viewed the fire of Jahannam, i.e., it was a very serious matter in their minds. It was something that would shake them. So how do we look at it? Well, let's consider how a bad action is done first time, because this is what leads to Jahannam. Sin, which is in itself an expression of disobedience and rebellion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to his law and to his pleasure. So, when a person first does something wrong, be it something small, a theft or something large, a murder, the first time a person does this, they are in sort of two minds. There is a conflict that goes on. That's because the heart at that point is quite clear and clean. And the input is from shaitan, or it's from dunya, or it's from the nafs. So when these enemies of the human being gather, whether it's one or the other, or if there's a combination, then they try to cause a kind of rot in the heart. They try to cause something that will allow the person to at least entertain doing the wrong thing. So the person entertains it in their mind, thinks about it, turns it over in their mind for a while. And after a while of contemplating this, then they are driven more and more closer to actually doing it. And this is one of the reasons why we actually are encouraged to think positive things and discouraged from thinking bad things, because whatever you have playing on your mind, whatever ideas you're turning over in your mind, eventually you will be driven to a point from the heart to actually do it. And that's why if we consider good things and constantly think of good things to do, then not only does that leave you in a good state, but it encourages you one day to get up and actually do something about that, and you will end up doing it, inshallah. But tragically, the reverse also occurs. The reverse also applies. The human heart, the human mind is such that whatever is contemplated, it will eventually draw the body into action into it. So contemplating bad things, contemplating evil things, this will continue in the mind until the first time that person does it. Now, when the first time that person does it, even at the performance of it, the person will be less and less in doubt over it, more and more willing to do it as they drive their body into action. And so whether they're committing the theft or whether they're committing the murder or whether they're committing whatever crime it is, however, there remains an amount of doubt in their minds until that event is over. But during the course of that event, the shayateen will drive the human being more. They will almost literally possess the human being to do the evil act and encourage that evil act. And so the human being comes to a point where he or she switches off their rational thinking and just goes with it and does it. And once it's done, or at the height of it being done, the shayateen that are actually in the heart, in the mind, causing this, they allow their pleasure to connect with the human being's conscience. And so the human being takes pleasure in doing what they're doing. They're driven to it now, and there's no turning back. So once that is done and the act is completed, then the shayateen will leave the human being. When the shayateen leave the human being, some semblance of their righteousness prior to committing that crime, because now their overall righteousness is decreased because they've committed that crime. It's there now, it's been experienced. But their righteousness prior to committing the whole crime was at a greater level. Well, some semblance of that returns. And then there's this internal conversation, which we interpret as guilt conscience. And what is happening is the soul is speaking to the nafs, to the being. What have you done? What have you done? This is an evil act. This is a wrong act. And so there can be that sort of going back and forth inside the mind of the person, inside the heart of the person. But then the shayateen will return. They will return sometime later and they will re-encourage the person. And this time they will have any actual event to use as a basis and say, well, you've done it now. And look, it wasn't so bad. You didn't get caught. It wasn't so bad. You can do it again and you'll enjoy it. You got away with it. You managed to achieve whatever it is the person was supposed to achieve. And you now are a better person. And you can go back and you can do it again. And you'll get away with it this time, even better. So with this sort of pushing and coaxing, the person is considering and goes back and repeats it. And repeats the bad action, whether it's a theft, whether it's a murder, and this is where your serial killers come in, and whether it's a theft, so where your person becomes a thief now, and he starts to become better at it, taking on more and more jobs, so to speak, to steal, whether for personal self or whether for somebody else. So once this action is now repeated again and again, it starts to become easier now. That first time doubt, that first time going back and forth in the mind and heart no longer happens. That becomes distant. And now they're more focused on doing the action and they enjoy that action and they look forward to the pleasure of whatever it is they will achieve from that action. And this can vary, depends. Even in case of murder, it becomes quite horrendous, because a person can start to actually enjoy their act of killing. And this is because the jinn, the shayateen that are inside the person, they are the ones who are actually enjoying it, because it's their duty, their job to cause us to become corrupt to the extent that we enjoy evil and bad deeds. But before we can enjoy it, they already enjoy it, and they tend to siphon that to our minds, to our conscience, so that we start to enjoy that action. So this is what the murderer starts to do. He starts to actually take pleasure in killing, and it seems to be a moment of satisfaction. So like a drug, he now needs to go back, and he's driven back more and more. And as this crime is repeated more and more, the less is the need for the jinn, for the shayateen to encourage that person, because the more and more the nafs of the person starts to take delight and pleasure in doing that wrong. And so it drives itself now. So it's almost like throwing something or rolling something, and it starts to pick up its own speed, and it starts to pick up its own momentum. So the nafs starts to pick up its own momentum, its own speed, and it is now able to commit these crimes with or without the help of the shayateen, without the help of the jinn. Then what happens thereafter is that the crime now can be added to. So the murder may become more elaborate, more drawn out, more become more imaginative. So the murderer may do more to the victim before killing them, may do more in the way they kill them, may come up with new ways to kill them, and so on, may increase the kind of person they may kill. They may start off with an adult male, then may start working on a female, then maybe a child. So it becomes more and more horrid, it becomes more and more evil, it becomes more and more disgusting. So the depth of evil, Allah knows best. But that's what starts to happen. The crime is added to. It's first done, then it's added to and repeated, and then it becomes increased. So this is what's happening to the person. And finally, it becomes a norm. It becomes a way of life for many people. And if we just stay with the example of the murderer, we now have a serial killer who's living in society, and he may have a normal job. He may be a teacher, he may be a doctor, he may be an engineer, he could be anything, but he's got a normal life. He may have a family, children, wife. And on the other side, he is this killer who is doing what he's doing. And wherever he's hiding the bodies, wherever he's doing the killings, or however he's doing it, on the equipment he's using, and the elaborate stage upon which he's doing it, all of this is hidden. Nobody knows it. Everybody only sees the nice person, the quiet person, the helpful person, the person who's getting on with his life and minding his own business. That becomes this person's normal life now, that he will carry on the one hand, teaching, learning, being a doctor, whatever it is, a family person, and on the other hand, will walk into the state of himself becoming a murderer, commit the murder in the same way as he goes through the day in open public, in front of everybody, teaching or being a doctor or whatever it is and dealing with people. He will do the murder in the same way. Obviously, it will be hidden, but he will go to it without any hesitation, any remorse, and any such feeling of negativity. It's just a norm now. It's just a norm. And that's why even if they get caught in the act, their reaction isn't something which is highly emotional, highly erratic, highly panicked. No, they're very calm. They'll simply give up. They can be arrested, taken away, and they are very calm. Even in the court, they sit there, blank face expressions. Many court cases will describe the human being to be like that, because to them it was like just taking a bike ride, just taking a walk, just doing everything else that they were doing normally, for which they would, if they were questioned, they would not have any expression, because they would say, this is my normal life. I do nothing wrong. In the same way they feel about their evil, because the whole event has become norm, and repeating it has become norm. There is absolutely no perception of what they're doing in the fact that they're killing someone, ending a life. There is no perception of that. So this is how shaitan, the nafs, and dunya work. As I said, sometimes all three, sometimes any one or two, but the way the dunya, the nafs, and the shaitan work upon a person to commit crimes is that at first it's difficult, doubtful, then it becomes repeated, then it becomes increased. And the crimes of dunya are usually to do with money, with wealth, and so on, that people can be oppressed, and many companies, millionaire companies, will have bosses who are taking advantage of poor workers in third world countries who are living in extreme conditions, but they have no concern with them. They simply want the product made by them, and the oppression and zulm that is done to them is completely, they have no concern with it. They have no concern with that. They may have young children who are dying, who are starving, who do not, because they're not being paid enough wage. It doesn't matter to them. So that may be on the one hand for the dunya. For the nafs, it may be something to do with greed and selfishness, jealousy, pride, etc. And for the shaitan, it could be evil actions such as murder and rape and theft. But however it is, in whatever field it is, it becomes a norm. This is how the person, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this ayah, becomes encompassed by sin, that their sin surrounds them. It becomes a part of their life. It becomes a part of their world, and they walk in that world as if they walk in the normal world, or as a normal person, a non-criminal would walk in a normal world. They will walk in this evil world, encompassed by their sin. They don't see the gravity of their situation. They're completely disassociated from that. However, for a kafir or a believer, this leads to hell. This leads to adhab. So this ayah is teaching us that, as it taught the Bani Israel, that if a sin is committed to the extent that it requires punishment in Jahannam, it will become irrelevant whether you are a kafir or whether you're a mu'min, whether you're a Muslim or whether you're a non-Muslim. In the case of a mu'min, obviously it can be still, even in the case of a mu'min, he can be dissuaded by shaitan. He can be deceived. He can lose his foothold on the Sirat al-Mustaqim, which is why we have du'as that keep us on the Sirat al-Mustaqim. We have the salah, which is 5 times every day, continuously for life, because we need to spiritually stay in touch with Allah, because spiritually there is so much happening to disentangle us, to sever the connection between us and Allah, that it must be completely refreshed or maintained, or both, constantly, for different people at different times, but all the time through their life, if they want to hold on and get to Jannah. So that is the struggle, that the people who lose that struggle, that is the struggle that is the main concern for us, for those people, because you lose that struggle, you lose that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no telling what depths of depravity the shayateen, the nafs, the dunya will take you to. There is no telling. So it's important to hold on to that. Otherwise, yes, it leads back to Jahannam. Now, something to help explain a little bit more about what is going on spiritually is to be found in this particular hadith. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن العبد إذا أخطأ خطيئة نكتت في قلبه نقطة سوداء وإذا هو نزع واستغفر وتاب سكل قلبه وإن عاد زيد فيها حتى تعلو قلبه وهو الران الذي ذكر الله كلا بل ران على قلوبهم ما كانوا يكسبون. صدق الله وصدق الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, verily, when the servant, a person, commits a sin, a black mark appears upon his heart. If he abandons the sin, seeks forgiveness, and repents, then his heart will be polished. If he returns to the sin, the blackness will be increased until it overcomes his heart. It is the covering that Allah has mentioned, and this is in the Quran. No, rather a covering is over their hearts from what they have earned. This is an ayah from the Quran. No, rather a covering is over their hearts from what they have earned, meaning what they have done has caused a covering over their hearts. What they have done, referring in this case obviously to sin. And the amount of sin they have done has caused a covering to come over their hearts, and as a result of that, they become lost. So Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us in this hadith about the servant who commits a sin. Now that sin is the first time, as I explained. Then a black mark appears upon his heart for the committing of that sin. However, if he abandons that sin, seeks forgiveness and repents, then his heart will be polished. So he does not continue to repeat that sin, but he makes tawbah. So two things: he do not repeat that sin, and he makes the tawbah. Then his heart will be polished. So it means it will be returned back to its original state prior to committing that crime. However, if he returns to the sin, now this is the second time and the third time, the blackness will be increased until it overcomes his heart. So until it overcomes his heart, meaning the sin is being now repeated. As I explained earlier, he's going back to it again and again. It's becoming easier and more something that he's looking forward to, and it becomes a part of his way of life. And so the blackness, the covering over his heart, it is increased until it overcomes the heart. And then, of course, the ayah that this covering is over their hearts and it's from what they have earned. So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. We all make mistakes, all commit sins out of negligence. However, Allah Ta'ala has permitted us purification if we seek His forgiveness. And this is a mercy and a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this nizam, this system, that if you make an error, you make a mistake, or even if you did it out of deliberate attempt at something, out because of anger, jealousy, greed, enmity, you did this and you actually plotted and planned it and did it deliberately. However, in all those instances where it was done out of mistake, out of forgetfulness, out of negligence, or out of deliberation, it was done, but after that, you had some sort of remorse and you understood the severity of what you've done and you wanted to get back with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that is all Allah ta'ala is looking for. That is all Allah Ta'ala is looking for. And we all have that within us. As I said, before we commit a crime, we are at a higher level of purity. And that level of purity is such that we have a strong sense of guilt, remorse. Now, once the crime is committed, though the level, the daraja, the status of the heart is lowered because of now the presence and existence of that spot, that mark, that stain on the heart. It lowers the heart compared to the pure heart. Nevertheless, the ability for remorse is still there. It's still quite strong. So if that remorse is used, if it's utilized, and the sincerity pushes it to the point where you call out upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you mean it genuinely, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there for you to be all the more for forgiveness. And as I said, this whole system is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is one of the blessings in this dunya that if you commit a crime, there is a means to return to the state you were in prior to committing that crime. There is a means to return to that state, so the heart is not lost. So it's not as if you've been marked now and you're forever going to be marked. No, you can return with the tawbah to the point where you did not have that mark on your heart, and that is indeed, subhanallah, a blessing. However, if a person continues, though, without repentance, the evil of the sin will cover the heart until it's completely covered. So this blackness, this darkness, this stain, this is not just a symbolic statement of a crime that you now have a black mark. Just as if you've done something good, you might get a medal. This is not just like that. Although it may be part of it. However, what else it is that the sin you commit, the deed you do, is one thing, but from that deed is an emanation of darkness, of evil. An amount of evil has now been generated as a result of that deed. So if it's a murder, an amount of evil has been permitted into this world. So that darkness represents itself in the heart of the person with a spot of darkness, as Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam has described, that darkness, a spot, occurs on the heart. So now that heart has got that stain. That heart has got that stain, which represents the crime that was committed. And into the world is released the evil of that crime. And that's why when more and more crimes are committed, then there is this general foreboding in the air because of the amount of crimes committed, in each one releasing an evil into the air. And like when people go into a house where a murder has been committed, they feel something. They feel a sense of dread. Well, the body's not there. The crime has been committed and discovered, and the person has been punished, etc. All of those things could have been done. The house could have been redecorated and renovated. Yet people do not feel comfortable in that home because the evil that emanated from that action remains there. It remains there. And so wherever crimes are committed, the evils remain there. And that's why you can have a very widespread, just like in the case of disease, you can have a widespread of virus or microorganism that is in the air where the diseases are prevalent, where the infection and contagion is. In the same way, where crimes are committed, there are evils, there are emanations of evil, and the presence of shayateen, obviously. And so it is like a sense of dread in a human being who can recognize it, who is attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has not committed such crimes. So this is what is happening in the heart. The mark of that crime is in the heart, and as the person continues to do it again and again and again, those marks are increasing, and as they're increasing, they're gelling together and making the heart become dark until it's completely covered. And that covering now is signifying that the person becomes habitual in the sin. It becomes a norm. This is how it becomes a norm now, that the heart is now darkened and it prefers the darkness and it prefers to stay away from light. And now we know it's completely covered. And so the dark, or the behavior of darkness, dark forces, dark evil is now norm, and light and goodness is at a great distance from it. That's when it becomes norm. So in effect, when that happens, when the heart is in that state, the heart now becomes deaf, dumb, and blind. In the Quran, we have a statement a couple of times where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the person becoming deaf, dumb, and blind, but there is also reference in other parts of the Quran where it talks about the heart which has become blind. The heart. So that is what is happening, because the body itself is just bone and muscle and skin. It does not have a sense of free will or a sense of feeling and morality. Those things are contained in the heart. So when the heart is covered in darkness and the heart becomes deaf, dumb, and blind, becoming deaf, dumb, and blind to remorse, becoming deaf, dumb, and blind to righteousness, becoming deaf, dumb, and blind to the commands of Allah and the presence of Allah and the punishment of Allah Ta'ala that will come eventually. It becomes deaf, dumb, and blind to all of these things. So its connection to anything and everything that actually would have kept it on the right path is severed because of this darkness. And as a result of that, when the heart becomes in such a state, now the norm is evil. The norm is disobedience. The norm is rebellion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands, and towards, obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. So how do we prevent this? How do we prevent this state, which tragically so many people in the world are in that state to some extent or other? And those who are to a greater extent are lost, and those who are to a lesser extent are continuing to pace towards the greater extent. Such is the state of the world today. There's a statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said that to do with the generations, he said the best of generations is my generation, then the generation after that, then the generation after that. And he stops, it doesn't continue. And what he does say about the generations after the first three, he said, lying will proliferate. Now, when something proliferates, it means it like spreads like a ripple in water. It spreads out in all directions. So when this lying is proliferating amongst humankind, it means in every sphere of life, in every career, in every profession. And so we find that today. We find corruption everywhere. In the places we least expected, governments, leadership, police force, the health service, doctors, the medical fraternity, the court systems, the lawyers, the barristers, the judges, So much wrong is going on in every field that we look at. Even the services to protect children, the social services, seem to be the ones who are actually helping, channeling, supporting child sex trafficking. So this is the extent of the pervasion of evil and dishonesty. So why is that happening? Part of that is exactly this, the corruption of the heart, that you've done something wrong once, you'll do it again and again until it becomes a norm and the person doesn't think differently. But the tragedy of it is that the world is becoming like this. The world is becoming like this, and the majority of people who are becoming like this in power are now enforcing that, so that it becomes norm and acceptable openly now that you can commit crimes, but they're no longer called crimes. Now pedophilia will no longer be a crime. Homosexuality, no longer a crime. All of these things are spiritually and religiously in all religions were considered crimes, no longer considered crimes. So because the very people who are committing things like this are now in positions of power and authority and lawmakers. So what can we do? One thing a person can do is maintain their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and prevent themselves from this and to fight against it within themselves spiritually. And one of the best steps to take is to consider the consequences of our wrong actions in this life and then answering to Allah ta'ala ultimately in the next life. So to consider whatever we do, never to consider it as small, but consider it as big, to consider its wider consequences, that you may hurt someone, hit someone, steal something from someone. But what will be the impact of that? It will go on and become bigger, because when somebody is hurt or down or put into hospital or something like that, then it impacts those who are around that person, who care for that person, who love that person, who depend upon that person, maybe children, maybe a wife, etc. And those people will be harmed in that day, maybe for weeks, whilst that person is recovering because of the harm you committed to that one person. It actually affects many people that one person was connected to. Consider the idea of death. If a person is killed, then a woman, his wife, who becomes a widow, his children become orphans, his brothers and sisters have lost their brother, the parents have lost their child, the friends have lost their friend, the neighbors have lost their neighbor, the employer has lost his employee, the work has suffered until somebody replaces him, but may not be as good as him. So the impact upon people for the service he may have provided is all lost. So all of this is the impact upon one person being removed from the existence of this life. So it isn't just a matter of what you did to that one person. It isn't just encased in that. It is much wider. And a believer looks at that and considers all of that and hence refrains. He refrains his nafs from doing such a thing, and he removes the shaitan from its whispering. The second thing that a believer would consider is not the smallness of the sin, but the greatness of the being in front of whom you are committing that sin, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not to consider the smallness of the sin, but the greatness of the being before whom this crime is being committed. And then, of course, the final accountability to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who created you and gave you everything you have, and you come with what was given to you as a pure heart, which is now stained. And those stains represent the stains of your life. To be before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that state is very shameful. So a believer and a person who wishes to prevent themselves from sin, these are some of the things they could consider. These are some of the things that they could reflect upon. And as a result of which it would refrain them from sin and the sins they have committed. Once they start to look at the wider consequences of what they have done, it will inshallah drive them to tawbah, sincere tawbah, and that sincere tawbah, inshallah, if it's put in place properly, will return their heart to the clean state. And that is important, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said clearly in the Quran, I will not look to your bodies or your forms and who or what you were in the dunya. I will look to your hearts to see the state of your heart. So we need to present to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pure hearts. And in order to do that, we need to remove the stains of our sins. And then we need to go one further. We need to cut down upon the things that cause us to become people of sin: jealousy, hatred, racism, selfishness, greed, spite, those kinds of things. We need to keep them in check because we can't get rid of them. That's part of our human nature, part of our test in this life. But the test, the passing of the test, is to keep these things in check so that they are not able to overpower us, but we have power over them, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us tawfiq to understand and to benefit from this, inshallah. Ameen. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu alayk.